Trigger warning. This video discusses topics that may be triggering to sensitive viewers, such as death, depression, and suicide. Viewer discretion is advised. Please watch episode 1 of Deaths of Joe Winko before watching this episode, as episode 1 explains more context to this episode, and as this episode is a continuation of episode 1.
What's up, people? Joe Winko here, your favorite Hawaiian guy, and here's my next episode of The Deaths of Joe Winko, which is a series of me explaining all the times I attempted suicide. Before I get to that, I just want to say that I absolutely love the state of Arkansas. It really is a beautiful place that I am spiritually connected to, which I'm going to be explaining why in this video. I always want to go back to Arkansas, always want to be driven through Arkansas, and always want to explore Arkansas because I think it's really pretty. Not really the touristy areas, but really the backwoods places of Arkansas are the main places that I'm driven to. The places where normal people never really go at all as a touristy area. That's my best way of explaining it. I actually do not know anyone who lives in Arkansas, honestly.
I also have never lived in Arkansas either.
I have been to Arkansas quite a few times. Those of you who've seen the videos that I filmed in Arkansas, usually I'm walking around on the side of a road or on a street in a small town in Arkansas, and I film myself walking around with a sad look on my face, a forlorn look on my face, even though I'm really happy to be there. There is a reason for that, and there is a reason why I'm spiritually connected to Arkansas, and I'm going to be explaining all that in this episode of The Deaths of Joe Winko. What happened this time was obviously different from the last time. Some of you guys may not consider this an actual suicide, but the whole entire time, my full intention was to die. And this was back in summer of 2015. I was 19 years old back in summer of 2015. Here's a picture of what I looked like back in year 2015. Alright, so that's me, back when I was 19 years old in 2015. This was almost a year after the last time I attempted suicide in August of 2014. I was out of high school by now, and I was finally attending college, but I was only taking 2 classes at a time because I was trying not to overload my schedule because I was stressed out at the retail job that I was working, and I still hated it with a passion. But at the retail job I was working, they cut my hours down to 10 hours a week. I literally asked my manager for that, and she had nothing against it, really. She was willing to cut my hours down to 10 hours a week, because by this point, everyone at the retail job knew about me cutting my wrist, as I explained in my previous episodes of The Deaths of Joe Winko. Everyone I was working with have seen the cuts on my wrist, and they all knew that I was having psychological issues, but no one ever told me anything about it or asked me about it, but I'm pretty sure that they all knew. And in all honesty, this was around the time where my mental state and my psychiatric state started to go a bit unhinged, in lack of better terms. As in, I would imagine a normal-minded person, I mean, I'm not a normal-minded person because I'm autistic, but I imagine a normal-minded person would think that thoughts like these are extremely unnerving and not good, in lack of better terms. So it was 2015, and I was still working the retail job that my adoptive mother made me keep, because she told me that if I quit the retail job, she would kick me out of the house, and I honestly took her seriously on that, and I absolutely believed it. I honestly was less stressed out that year. I mean, slightly less stressed out that year, but I still could not stand that job at all. And I didn't want to go to college either. I was going to college for video production, but I was just taking general courses at that time. And I started learning more and more about video production, and it really was not the career that I wanted at all. Because when I'm just making YouTube videos for myself and just to get myself out there and stuff like that, it's one thing, because I'm actually doing it for fun. But if I actually had to do it to live off of and survive off of, that would not be good, and that would be miserable, honestly. Because as I said, I don't make any money off of any of my videos. And plus, the whole video production career, from what I've known about it and from what I've learned about it, it definitely was not ideal, honestly. But my adoptive mother was also making me take the college courses too, because she wanted me to attend college. She, as I said, she was very bossy and demanding and controlling, really. But the stupid thing was, she was also making me pay for the college classes myself. Even though I really didn't want to attend them at all, at that time I was still under her control, in lack of better terms. So in 2015, it may have not been extremely bad as 2014 or 2013 when I started working the retail job, but I still was very unhappy at that point in year 2015. But at that time, I still wasn't showing it on YouTube at all. I was still giving off that happy Joe Winko vibe in my YouTube videos from 2015. Which for some reason, everyone thought that I was always like that, always happy in 2015, but I absolutely was not. My mind was still in very dark places. Just didn't have the guts to express it at that time, as I do nowadays. I didn't really want to try suicide again. I still wanted to die, but I didn't want to directly kill myself, if that makes sense. Because the last time I tried overdosing, and it didn't work, but I actually ended up getting sick after I overdosed. Not extremely sick, but very uncomfortably sick from everything I overdosed on. And it wasn't good, and I didn't want to try it again, really. So I came up with this idea instead. Around that time in 2015, I started becoming obsessed with Jane Doe cases. And basically those cases were about females who were found dead and they didn't know who they were or where they came from at all, so they call them Jane Does. Which led me to becoming obsessed with John Doe cases. Which is exactly the same thing about males who are found dead, men who are found dead somewhere, but they don't know who they are or where they came from, so they're listed as John Does. And I was reading about a lot of John Doe cases, and in October of 2015, I even ended up creating a YouTube channel called John Doe Appeals, which is a YouTube channel that I do of me having videos about an unidentified man who was found dead somewhere. I show the post-mortem picture of him that they take when they're doing the autopsy on him. And I also state in the videos what he was wearing and where he was found and the circumstances surrounding his death. And I really began to become obsessed with those cases. However, that whole John Doe Appeals YouTube channel would not have existed if I would have died at this time in 2015. So let's rewind to June of 2015. I don't remember the exact date, but I know that it was somewhere around mid to late June of 2015. I was still working the job, working retail, and I hated it. I was done with my college courses for that time of the year, but I was still miserable working the clothing store job that my adoptive mother was making me keep. I didn't want to try suicide again because I couldn't directly kill myself at all, but this is what I thought of instead. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this in my last episode of the deaths of Joe Winko, but I have talked about this in a lot of my YouTube videos. I'm actually a type 1 diabetic, and I'm insulin dependent. And basically, when you're a type 1 diabetic, you have to take insulin or else you die. Because with type 1 diabetes, your body doesn't produce any insulin or enough insulin to survive at all. I have to inject myself with insulin every single day since I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes back in 2008. In February of 2008, around Valentine's Day when I was diagnosed. And I'll be coming back to that later in this episode. I would die if I didn't have any insulin and didn't take any insulin. My blood sugars would go high regardless of whether or not I eat anything. My blood sugars would go high, which would lead to me going into a coma, and which would lead to me going into diabetic ketoacidosis, which would cause all my organs to shut down, and then I would die. And I always estimated that that would take 5 to 8 days for that to happen, from when I last take insulin to when I'm dead. It would take 5 to 8 days. However, there's tons of medical professionals who claim to know a lot about diabetes. Every single medical professional and every single doctor I talked about this with has told me that I'm quote unquote grossly overestimating the amount of time that I would last without my insulin. Meaning that they all believe that I would not last 5 to 8 days without insulin and that I would actually die much, much sooner than 5 to 8 days. I also really hated my hometown. I always hated it and was still living there in Wisconsin in 2015. So this is the idea that I came up with. I was planning to run away and leave all my insulin behind and go someplace far away where no one knows who I am at all and be left for dead somewhere without my insulin, where I would end up dying of my type 1 diabetes, as I explained earlier, and then my body would eventually be found and then I would become a John Doe. And I started thinking about that from late 2014, like even after that and even after this, I kept thinking about running far away and dying somewhere of no insulin and them finding my body and me being listed as a John Doe. I literally think of that whenever I read about an unidentified body being found. And back in 2015, that's exactly what I wanted to happen. I wanted to die somewhere and become a John Doe and have my adoptive mother never know what happened to me at all. Because my adoptive mother, she always liked to know everything, really. As I said, she was really controlling back then, but she always liked to know everything, which comes with her being controlling. So I believed that that would spite her, really, because I would be dead, far away as a John Doe. She would have no idea where I went or what happened. And it's not like she would feel sorry for me at all, or feel sad, or feel worried. At that time, I just felt that if I did that back then, it would end up haunting her for the rest of her life. I even brought that up a lot and whenever we got into an argument that I was going to run away without my insulin and that I was going to die and be buried as a John Doe far away from Wisconsin, and she would have no idea where I went or what happened. And whenever I brought that up during an argument, she would just brush it off and be like, oh, whatever, what? Like, as she always would. So you guys may also be wondering, how exactly was I going to run away? Well, I had that planned out too. Back in June of 2015, I posted an ad on Craigslist in the rideshare section of Craigslist, which is a section of Craigslist where people ask for rides somewhere. Basically like virtual hitchhiking. Say that you're trying to get here or trying to get there, and then someone will say, "Oh, I'm heading there. I'll drive you down there too with me." And that's basically what the rideshare section of Craigslist is. I posted an ad on the rideshare section of Craigslist back in June 2015, and I said that I wanted to run away forever. I said that I was really unhappy where I was at. I said that I was 19 years old, so I was old enough to leave whenever I want to, and it wasn't illegal or anything because I was an adult by then. Just like it wasn't illegal for my adoptive mother to kick me out because I was an adult by then. And I was just saying that I wanted to run far away from Wisconsin. I was looking for someone to pick me up and take me far away from Wisconsin and drop me off somewhere so I can leave and never come back. And I also included my phone number on the Craigslist ad and a couple pictures of myself as well. So after I posted the ad on Craigslist, I ended up getting a phone call from a man. I don't remember what his name was, but I remember he had this raspy voice. He kind of sounded like the killer from the Scream movies. He told me that he saw my ad I posted on Craigslist about wanting to run away forever, and he made sure to ask me if I was really 19 and everything, and I told him, yes, I am. And he told me that I looked very handsome in the pictures I posted as well, and I told him, okay, thank you. I mean, 'cause it is Craigslist. I mean, didn't surprise me that he told me that. He told me that he was going to be going down to Arkansas, that he was going to be driving down to Arkansas, and he was willing to come to my town I was living in Wisconsin, and pick me up from there and take me down to Arkansas with him. Before all this, I never really thought anything about the state of Arkansas. But after this happened, I became obsessed with it. And I told him, okay, you can come pick me up. And we talked a bit more. It was just really small talk and everything. But I did not tell him what I was planning on doing. I did not tell him that I was going to be leaving all my insulin behind and that I was going to wander away and die. Because I was just thinking that he was just going to drop me off down in Arkansas and then I would go off on my own and everything. Which is basically what, he confirmed to me. He told me that he would be okay with dropping me off down in Arkansas so I can get away from Wisconsin. We agreed for him to pick me up from this abandoned grocery store parking lot in West Allis, Wisconsin at 1 a.m. I then became obsessed with Arkansas at that point because I thought that that was going to be the place where I would end up dying in Arkansas. And still obsessed with it to this day because that's the place I was going to die at back then. If everything would have went how I intended it to go, I would have died in Arkansas. So I started reading about Arkansas online and started looking at pictures of Arkansas online. And I started reading about morbid and gloomy stuff that happened in Arkansas. One thing I read about was a little girl who went missing in Arkansas back in 1995, which is the reason why that stood out to me because 1995 was actually the same year that I was born. She went missing in June of 1995, almost 20 years to when I was going to run away to Arkansas forever. And her name was Morgan Nick. Let me show you her pictures right here. That's her. And I never will forget that picture, and I never will forget reading about her. She was a little girl who was at a baseball game in Arkansas, and it was late at night. From what I remember, from what I read about her back then, they said that they last saw her talking to some creepy guy by the parking lot at the baseball field where the baseball game was being held at. And she went missing, and everyone's assuming that this creepy guy is the one that took her. And to this day, no one knows where she is or what happened to her, but they all think that she was kidnapped by this man in the sketch. She was only 6 years old, too, and I thought it was really haunting and really sad, and I felt really sorry for her. So then I started reading about more cases in Arkansas, more murder cases in Arkansas, and I ended up reading about this woman who died in Arkansas. So, this woman was actually another Jane Doe case, but the weird thing is, there were actually pictures of her available, live pictures of her available, and I never seen that with a Jane Doe case before, live pictures of the person available, because usually when you're reading about a Jane Doe or a John Doe who was found dead somewhere, you just see their morgue and autopsy photos. Well, not autopsy photos, but their post-mortem photos of them laying in the exam bed deceased. But with this woman, they actually had pictures of her and even had the fake names she was using while she was in Arkansas. She has been identified, but they never released her full name. But her first name was Kelly, and she was murdered on July 10th, 1991 in El Dorado, Arkansas at a motel. She was actually a prostitute who was shot and murdered by her pimp. I thought it was very haunting, and I felt very sorry for her. And in a way, I kind of related to her in a bit because she was a prostitute, and that was actually one thing that I did a couple times back when I was 16 years old. Luckily, I didn't fall victim to that lifestyle. Luckily, I didn't end up getting a pimp at all. Luckily, I didn't get arrested for it either. But that's kind of what I did a couple times back when I was 16 and 17 years old. And it was just an idea that I got because I was reading about prostitutes online, and I thought that sounded interesting, that people paid for sex, and I only did that a couple times back when I was 16 and 17. I wouldn't even consider it prostitution that much. I mean, like, I would hook up with a guy on Craigslist and then ask him for money afterwards, and he would be nice enough to give it to me. And yeah, I mean, that's basically all it was, really. It wasn't like I was charging him to do anything with me. But I would just ask for money after we have sex with each other. But back in 2015, my 19-year-old autistic mind, I felt like I related to her because I felt like I did prostitution back then because of that. And I felt really sorry for her, and I thought it was really sad that someone was vicious enough to shoot her and kill her. And I just thought it was really sad how no one knew who she was or where she came from. And it is very sad what happened to her. It's sad what happened to all these people I'm talking about. But then there was another story of another woman who was murdered in Arkansas. And in all honesty, this is the one that haunted me the most. They didn't know what her name was at the time, but eventually they found out that her name was Cynthia Marie Robinson. But at that time, she was just known as the 1994 Arkansas Jane Doe. She was found dead near a creek by fishermen, and she had died from gunshot wounds. They described her as an African-American female with black, short, curly hair, which is kind of the same hairstyle I have, which is the same way my hair is, really. She was murdered around February 14th of 1994. That's when they believe she was murdered. February 14th, Valentine's Day, that's the same date that I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2008 in February, which was what was going to kill me in the state of Arkansas, because I was going to leave all my insulin behind and die in Arkansas. She was naked from the waist down when they found her body, and I remember reading that she most likely was sexually assaulted. To me, the most haunting thing about this case was the sweater that she was wearing. She was wearing a red sweater with gold stars on it, and I'm going to show you guys a picture of that right now. That's the sweater she was wearing. And I honestly still get the chills whenever I see those pictures of the sweater. And to be completely honest, that's literally the first thing I think of when I think of Arkansas. I think of this woman who was murdered and found dead in Arkansas, viciously murdered, shot to death, and found dead in Arkansas, who is wearing the red sweater with gold stars. One of the reasons why it haunted me so much is because that sweater actually looks a lot like a sweater that I actually have, except mine didn't have stars on it. That picture of me was actually taken back in Christmas of 2014. That was a sweater that I got for Christmas. And that was actually my favorite sweater. And it resembled the sweater that she was found dead wearing, except it doesn't have the stars on it. And she was also an African American female. I'm actually mixed with African American, in case you guys didn't notice. I'm mixed with African American, and I have the short curly hair, just like she has. That was honestly the most haunting case that I read about in Arkansas, really. The one that stuck with me the most. She was listed as a Jane Doe, and I'm assuming she was buried as a Jane Doe. I don't know where they buried her or what cemetery her body was buried at, because I couldn't figure that out at all. But I started thinking that when I ran away to Arkansas and when I would die in Arkansas, that I would be buried right next to her in the unidentified section, and that's what I kept imagining when I read about her. And I felt really sorry for her, because it was really sad and it was really haunting. I mean, what was going to happen to me wasn't nearly as tragic as what happened to Cynthia. I mean, Cynthia was viciously murdered by some cruel, evil person. I myself was just running away and dying at my own free will, but she was actually murdered. Clearly, she didn't want that fate, obviously. Even though I wanted to have that fate back in 2015 of being found dead. I mean, I didn't think I was going to be murdered in Arkansas. I thought I was just going to die of no insulin and be found dead on the side of a road. I didn't think I would be shot to death like she was. But this happened to her, and I felt really sorry for her when I first read about her online. And I still feel sorry for her to this day. I still think about her. Whenever someone mentions Arkansas, that's literally the first thing I think of. The red sweater with the gold stars, and I think of her. And that's definitely because of my autism mind that causes me to think that way, but it was very haunting. And I kept thinking that I was going to be buried right next to her. And to this day, I still imagine that if I would have died in Arkansas back in 2015 like I was intending, I would have been buried at the same cemetery in the unidentified section right next to her. And there's even a cemetery in Arkansas that I imagined my body being buried at. That is Paradise Gardens Cemetery in northeastern Arkansas, and I have been there quite a few times. And to top it all off, that cemetery is actually an African American cemetery. As you guys know, I'm part African American myself, so they definitely would have buried me there if I was found dead close enough to that area. I had no idea exactly where in Arkansas I was going to end up or where I'd be found dead at. I wasn't even thinking of that. I just knew that I was going to die far away from Wisconsin, and I knew that no one in Arkansas would know who I was, so I would be buried as a John Doe exactly as I wanted to be.
Later that night, after I read all of that online, I set out to meet the stranger who was going to be taking me down to Arkansas. We had both agreed to meet at an abandoned grocery store parking lot. My intention was to never come back again. Some of you guys may not consider this story a suicide attempt, but my intention was not to survive. My intention was to die.
Now, a few years ago, I actually did a video of me at the abandoned grocery store parking lot. It was during the daytime, but I did a video of me talking about how that was going to be the place in West Dallas, Wisconsin, where the stranger would pick me up from, and he would take me down to Arkansas. Let me show it to you guys right here. That's me at the grocery store parking lot. But at the time where I was going to meet the stranger at the parking lot, that parking lot was very, very dark. It was like a black abyss when I walked into that parking lot, and I just remember walking through the parking lot in complete darkness. He told me that he was going to be parked out there, and I was assuming that that would be the only car parked out in the parking lot because it was an abandoned grocery store. Who the hell is going to go there at 1 a.m.? And it's in West Dallas, Wisconsin. I mean, no one's going to be at an abandoned grocery store parking lot at 1 a.m. And I was planning on walking out there and finding him, and then eventually we would go off with each other down to Arkansas. I was wearing no shirt, my red shorts, and my pointy red bandana, and a pair of shoes. That's all I had on. Exactly what I'm wearing right now, and exactly what I was wearing in this picture. That's what I was wearing when I met him at the parking lot, because I wanted to wear that when I died, because it's my signature red pointy bandana, but also because I wanted my biological uncle to recognize me once I'm in heaven with him. And I also wanted that to be what I was found wearing when they found my body in Arkansas and listed me as a John Doe. I wanted them to find me wearing the red pointy bandana and the red shorts with no shirt.
This is truly what I thought was going to happen and what I intended on happening. I thought that the stranger would pick me up from the abandoned grocery store parking lot in West Dallas, Wisconsin. From there, he would drive me down from where I lived in Wisconsin down into Arkansas, where he would drop me off in Arkansas, where I imagined I would have either been left out in the wilderness areas of Arkansas or out in the rural farmland areas of Arkansas, where I would wander around aimlessly. This is exactly why whenever you see a video of me in Arkansas, I'm always walking along the side of a road with a forlorn look on my face, sometimes even appearing to be sick or in pain. It's because I always try reenacting what would have happened that summer if I would have been left for dead in Arkansas, as I had wanted to back then. I imagined I would continue walking the streets of Arkansas until I collapsed and went into a fatal diabetic coma from no insulin, since I purposely left it all behind. And very soon after that, all of my organs would shut down and I would die from diabetic ketoacidosis, exactly as I was planning on. After that, my body would have been found by strangers. No one would know who I was at all, because I don't know anyone in Arkansas. My identity would remain a mystery to all of them, and I would have been buried in the Arkansas cemetery as a John Doe, the exact fate that I intended, and the exact fate that I was imagining. I'm not exactly sure how much media attention this would have attracted in the state of Arkansas if this had occurred in real life, but depending on exactly where I was found, I would imagine this would have at least been talked about in Arkansas. If anyone from Arkansas is watching this video, I'll let you be the judge on that in the comments of this video. If everything I was intending actually occurred, how do you think the citizens of Arkansas would have reacted to this? Meanwhile, back in Wisconsin, my adoptive mother would realize that I was gone and that I was missing, and she most likely would never know what truly happened. I could be wrong, but I would imagine at that time my adoptive mother would have been extremely stressed out by this. Not because she would have been worried about me or felt sorry for me, because clearly at that time she wasn't, because she knew how miserable I was working that retail job that she made me keep, despite going into self-mutilations and telling her that I was going to run away and die. But my adoptive mother is the kind of person who likes to know everything that's going on. But what became of me would remain a total mystery to her. A mystery that would continuously haunt her for years after my death. I definitely know that it absolutely would. I also imagine my adoptive mother would likely never found out what really happened to me at all. And even if she did, it would likely take years for her to ever find out, since the state of Wisconsin actually has a horrible system for reporting missing adults. Remember, I was 19 years old at the time, and also because she's not my biological mother, therefore she would have no DNA to enter into the missing persons database to find me, and I would likely remain buried as a John Doe for years, or decades, or possibly even forever. But even if she did find out, I still would have never returned to Wisconsin again. And most importantly, I would have finally been free from my retail job for eternity, and I wouldn't even have had to die in my tragic hometown. I would be far away, forever, and I would finally be at peace, forever, which is exactly what I was imagining back then. But as everyone watching this video obviously knows, that is not what ended up happening.
So I was in the abandoned parking lot, and it was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. That's when these headlights finally flashed right in front of me. They finally turned on right in front of me. And I saw the car right in front of me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's him. But something caught my attention about him. I saw him sitting in the front seat of the car, in the driver's seat of the car. He had his hands on the steering wheel. He looked right into my eyes, and I looked back at him, but he had this terrified look on his face. He was like he had this horrified look on his face, and I was just like, I was confused. I didn't know what he was so afraid of. And I didn't look behind me or anything. I didn't think there was anything behind me, because he was looking me directly in the eyes. He wasn't looking behind me or anything, but he was in the front seat of his car, and he had this terrified look on his face. And then I was just standing there like, what? And I was walking towards his car. All of a sudden I heard his engine rev up really loud. He swerves around me and drives off and leaves, and there I was alone in the dark grocery store parking lot by myself, and I was mad. I was really, really pissed off and really mad. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Okay, I thought I was gonna run away forever. I thought I was going to finally die. I thought I was gonna leave my adoptive family behind forever. Thought I was going to leave my town in Wisconsin behind forever. I thought I was gonna leave that stupid retail job behind forever. But then that happened. And I was really pissed off about it, but at that point I was just like, you know what? Whatever. I'll try finding someone else to run away with. And I was just really mad. And I just walked home. And I was just really pissed off. I mean, I didn't know what he saw that scared him away like that, because I remember that night very well. He was looking me right in the eye, and he drove off and left. I don't know what he saw, but he just looked terrified. And I never really thought of what it was or what he saw, but he looked terrified and drove away and left. Because he didn't know what I was going to do down in Arkansas. I didn't tell him that I was leaving all my insulin behind and running away, and going to die of diabetic ketoacidosis out in the streets of Arkansas and be buried in a cemetery as a John Doe. I was smart enough to not tell him any of that. I just told him that I wanted to run away, but I was smart enough not to tell him any of that because I figured he would have flaked out on me if I told him all that. He would have thought, oh, you're unhinged. I can't go anywhere with you. I mean, because I was really good at hiding my unstableness. Definitely good at it. You guys who watched me on YouTube, I mean, if anyone watching this video watched me on YouTube back in 2015, you guys would know that I was really good at hiding my mental state back then. Because no one on YouTube would have any idea that I was going to do this. I just imagined, I didn't even think that much about my YouTube channel back then. When at that time I was going to run away to Arkansas. I just thought, okay, my videos on YouTube are just going to stop uploading. Yeah, like I had like other projects on the way because like you never know if you're going to die, whether or not. But I was just thinking, okay, any project that I was working on, I'm not going to be finishing it and just going to leave it behind. But I mean, I was miserable in 2015 because I kept working that damn retail job and my adopted mother was still bossing me around, but I didn't rebel against her yet. But eventually I would end up rebelling against her and more stuff would happen after that, but I'll be talking about that in my next episode of Deaths of Joe Winko. But we aren't done yet. So even after all that happened, even though I didn't end up running away to Arkansas forever like I thought I was going to, I still kept thinking about it over and over again. I wasn't even thinking about what scared the guy away. I was still imagining what would have happened if I actually had ran away to Arkansas forever and ended up dying in Arkansas. And I kept imagining myself becoming a John Doe. And a while after this, I can't really remember exactly when I discovered this song, I ended up hearing this one song on YouTube, and it was called Cruel Summer by Bananarama. It's another song from the 1980s, and the songs from the 1980s, they always have this really haunting tone to them due to the recording quality and everything like that. When I listened to this song, the first time I listened to it, I immediately thought, yeah, this song definitely reminds me of how I was going to be left for dead in Arkansas, the lyrics and everything. And in all honesty, that became the song that made me think of Arkansas. Let me play this song to you guys right now. That xylophone theme. Okay, so the first verse of that song, hot summer streets and the pavements are burning, I sit around. That makes me think of how much I hated the retail job. Hot summer streets, pavements are burning, I sit around, because, well, I wasn't sitting, I was standing around. That makes me imagine being at my retail job, being forced to work my retail job by my adoptive mother. Hot summer streets, pavements are burning, how uncomfortable it was and everything, and I sit around, really standing around, but that's what that verse of the song made me think of. So the next part of that song, trying to smile, but the air is so heavy and dry. That part of the lyrics makes me think of how I tried staying positive. Like, I kept doing my other activities I loved doing, like doing my YouTube videos and stuff like that. And I didn't bring this up earlier, but I know that someone is going to be saying, oh, why don't you just make money off your YouTube videos? Well, I can't make money off my YouTube videos. Even back in 2015, I wasn't able to. And I talked about that in other videos, though. But that's what I thought it meant. Trying to smile, but the air is so heavy and dry. That means that I'm trying to not let the job bring me down so much, even though I hate it and even though I'm miserable and want to be dead. you still would try to make the best, really. That's what I tried doing back then, honestly. But still, I wanted to run away and die somewhere. And also, I guess you can also say, knowing that it would all be over, because I would think about that while I was working the retail job. I would get so angry and think, well, I just want to run away and leave everyone behind forever. And I would tell myself, one day I'm going to run away, and one day this is all going to end, and one day I'm going to leave this place forever and never come back. And I knew it was going to happen, and it did end up happening. I mean, luckily in real life it did end up happening. I didn't have to die at all for it to happen, and I'm very glad about that. But back then I was thinking I had to, and I was prepared for it, really, because I was miserable there. Strange voices are saying, what did they say? Things I can't understand. It's too close for comfort. This heat has got right out of hand. When I was working retail, customers would always come up, ask you questions, always like bitch about this, bitch about that. I worked at a clothing store, so of course they're going to be bitching about a lot of stuff. And so that means things I can't understand, like getting overwhelmed by it and everything. And it's too close for comfort. This heat has got right out of hand. That means that I was done with everything and I was ready to run away and leave forever, which is what I was going to do. And now we're going to be getting to the chorus. Okay, so that part of the song, it's a cruel, cruel summer. This was all going on in summer of 2015. That's when I was going to run away forever, leaving me here on my own. That makes me think, pretty self-explanatory, but that makes me think of how I was going to be left for dead in Arkansas, how the stranger was going to drop me off on the side of the road. I mean, because I told him to, but he was going to drop me off on the side of the road, and I was going to wander around aimlessly until I collapse and die of no insulin. Then in the rest of that song, it's a cruel, cruel summer. Now you're gone. Now you're gone, meaning that I was dead, that I was no longer alive anymore, that my adoptive family back in Wisconsin had no idea where I went or what happened, exactly what they deserved. They would have that haunting them for the rest of their lives, not because they feel sorry for me, but because they always want to know everything. Back then they always wanted to know everything, not so much anymore, but back then they always wanted to know everything, and that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, knowing that I was gone. I mean, they would have knew that I was dead. They would have knew what happened. But they wouldn't know the exact circumstances or where, because I did tell them many times that I was planning on running away without my insulin, and I'm pretty sure they would have just assumed that I was dead and gone, and in all honesty, probably over time, they probably just wouldn't care at all. I mean, I imagine that is exactly what they would have ended up doing. But I really don't care about that, because the whole point was that I hated the retail job and I wanted to leave forever and leave them all behind forever, which is exactly what I would have done. Even if they would have found out who I was right away and returned my body back to Wisconsin, which I would have absolutely hated, I would not want them to do that at all, because I hate Wisconsin, and I'm pretty certain that they wouldn't, because my adoptive parents would have had to pay for that if I would have died in Arkansas and they had to exhume my body and take my remains back to Wisconsin. They wouldn't have done that. They would not have done that. Plus, they know how much I hated Wisconsin and wanted to leave. I mean, I've been talking about that ever since I was a kid. But they knew about that, so they would have just left me buried in Arkansas, so now I'm gone. That's what that part of the song makes me think of. But there's more. Let's get to the second verse of the song. I want to also point out that that xylophone tune that you hear throughout the song, the do 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 do, that's very haunting. I thought that part of the song was very haunting when I heard it. And whenever I hear that, I think of myself wandering the streets of Arkansas far away, knowing that I'm going to die. Not really being happy about it, honestly, not being excited for it, but just not caring, but being relieved that I left Wisconsin behind forever and left the clothing store behind forever. I wouldn't have regretted it. I absolutely would not have regretted it at that time. I mean, yeah, I probably would have been in pain and everything and would have been suffering from no insulin. That's why whenever you see a video of me walking the streets of Arkansas, I have a forlorn look on my face. Sometimes you see me clutching my stomach, because that's exactly what I would have been doing if I was left there without insulin, because I would have been in pain, because my body's going into diabetic ketoacidosis and my organs are shutting down, but I'm far away out in Arkansas, and I would really just want it to end right away. So that's the thing. Okay, so they sing in the song, "The city is crowded, my friends are away, and I'm on my own." So, the city is crowded, that made me think of the mall being crowded and me having to work at the mall at my retail job while it's crowded. So that's what the whole city is crowded part made me think of. My friends are away. Now, that reminded me, one, of my biological uncle who passed away back in 2012, who I still miss dearly to this day, and absolutely miss dearly back then. I always miss my uncle. If he was still alive, if my biological uncle was still alive, none of this stuff would have never happened. I would still be over in the Dominican Republic living with him. I mean, I didn't really want to live on an island, though. I mean, he even started to notice that I didn't like living on the island. He actually was talking about moving away to either Brazil or the United Kingdom because he knew that I liked going on long drives so much. That's one thing I never really talked about much in my episodes of Joe Winko Talk, but that's one thing that he used to mention from time to time because he knew that I loved going on long drives and he wanted to live in a continental place so we could go on more adventures together, but he passed away from cancer in 2012, so we never got the chance to do that. Went into a coma in 2010, passed away from cancer in 2012. I was going to go into a coma while I'm wandering the streets of Arkansas, and all my organs would shut down and then I would die. So I didn't think that would take 2 years, but he was in a hospital when he passed away, so yeah. And also, at that time, I had another friend who passed away from a heroin overdose back in 2013, late 2013. So not too far before the time I was going to run away to Arkansas forever and die. So that's what my friends are away made me think of. My biological uncle who passed away and my other friend who died of the heroin and meth overdose back in 2013. In case you're all wondering, I do not use heroin or meth. I never used heroin or meth or any kind of drug. I didn't even know my friend was addicted to heroin or meth until after he died. It's too hot to handle, so I gotta get up and go. That part of the song made me think of, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory at this point, but it just made me think of, yeah, I'm tired. This too hot to handle. I hate this job so much, so I gotta get up and go, which is exactly what I was trying to do, and which is exactly what I was going to do back then. Now, that was the second chorus of the song. They add in something else in the second chorus of the song. Like, basically, the rest of the song is basically them singing, "It's a cruel, cruel summer, leaving me here on my own. It's a cruel, cruel summer, now you're gone." But they add in, "You're not the only one." And, I mean, it should be self-explanatory at that point. I'm not the only one, meaning that I'm not the only one who died in Arkansas, not the only John Doe or unidentified person who would have died in Arkansas. There was the 1991 Jane Doe who died in Arkansas, who is actually named Kelly, and then the 1994 Arkansas Jane Doe, who was later identified as Cynthia. So that's what they mean when they sing, "I'm not the only one." That's what I felt like they meant. Now, there's one more thing I want to clarify real quick. I know that Bananarama did not write this song about me running away to Arkansas. I know that the song is not about me running away to Arkansas. This is just the way I imagined it and interpreted it. But I didn't hear this song until after all this happened. It was shortly after all this happened, but it was after I was going to run away to Arkansas forever. When I was at the abandoned grocery store parking lot that night, I never heard the song "Cruel Summer" by Bananarama before. That song was not playing in my head or anything like that. I didn't hear it until afterwards. So if I would have ran away to Arkansas and died, I would have never heard that song, "Cruel Summer" by Bananarama. Which would have been sad, honestly, that I would have never heard that song at all. Unless I heard it while I was in heaven. You know what, now that I think of it, that would have been one way I would have heard that song after I died in Arkansas and I was in the afterlife. Then I would have heard that song, "Cruel Summer" by Bananarama. And then I would have, exactly like I'm doing now, put two and two together. I'm pretty sure I still would have had my same psychological state up in heaven or in the afterlife, but whatever your guys' faith is, I believe that I would have gone to a heaven where things are better, really. So, I mean, I would have been happier in heaven. I mean, hell, things are better for me right now. Yeah, they're not quite ideal, but things are way better for me right now than they were back in 2015. I can definitely assure you guys of that. I don't think of running away and dying anymore. I don't really think of dying at all, really. I mean, well, I don't think of wanting to die at all. I think that's what I meant to say. I mean, who doesn't think of death every now and then? I think of it pretty often. All my YouTube content involves death and stuff like that, but yeah. But I'm not wanting to run away and die because I'm miserable or anything. Not wanting to run away or die at all, really. But that's basically how the song "Cruel Summer" by Bananarama reminded me of the time I was going to run away to Arkansas.
There's honestly so much I have to say about all this. This video technically explains my whole obsession with Arkansas. Before all of this happened, I never would even think about Arkansas. But now it's a state that I'm spiritually connected to, for extremely gloomy reasons, but it is a state that I'm spiritually connected to. I actually did end up going to Arkansas for the first time back in 2017, when another stranger I met on Craigslist brought me there. It honestly looked exactly how I imagined it, until we got to the Ozark Mountains. I didn't think there were mountains in Arkansas at first, and I thought it was really cool. Despite my gloomy reasons for being spiritually connected to Arkansas, Arkansas really is a beautiful place, and I always want to go back there, and get footage from there too. Another thing that I would do pretty often is I would always try to find people from Arkansas and tell them the story about how I almost ran away to Arkansas forever, where I would have died intentionally and became a John Doe, also intentionally. I'm always curious to what they think of that for some reason, and I always wonder how the people of Arkansas would have reacted. Over the years, I posted my story about how I almost ran away to Arkansas forever many times on many web forums, Facebook groups, subreddits, and now even Discord servers about Arkansas, but most of the time people just don't comment and or get freaked out and don't say anything. That's actually what happened 100% of the time, and never want to comment or say anything besides calling me crazy, which I don't really blame them for, honestly. It is a bit upsetting, but understandable the more I think about it. You have to remember, I have never lived in Arkansas, and I am not from the South. I was born in Wisconsin. That is where I grew up, and I hated it there. The Midwest is actually notorious for depression, something extremely common in the Midwestern states, especially in places like Wisconsin. From what I noticed, it's a completely different story in the state of Arkansas. I remember reading online many times that the South tends to be the happiest region in the USA, mainly due to the warmer weather, obviously, but also the family connections and friendships down south between people living in small, rural towns in the South really brings them close to each other. I know that there obviously are exceptions, but I would imagine that most people in Arkansas wouldn't be able to fathom hating life so much that you want to run off and purposely die somewhere. I definitely understand how it could be baffling to the average Southerner from Arkansas. But that is not the question I had for them, obviously. The real question I always have for them is how do they imagine the citizens living in Arkansas, wherever my body would have ended up being found, would actually react to something like that actually occurring? Out of all my years from posting about this story, no one from Arkansas has ever answered that question. The comments on this video are open to anyone, though. I have always have speculated that if someone from Arkansas actually did comment on this story after knowing what was going to happen and seeing all the fake newspapers and fake posters that I typed up and edited, they would straight up tell me that it wouldn't get that much attention in real life, and that all they would do is just take me to the morgue and bury me somewhere. But I'm imagining it would get a lot of attention for this reason. Remember, I was 19 years old at the time I was going to run away to Arkansas forever. Legally, I was an adult. But if I would have been found dead in Arkansas and they took me back to the morgue, they would have examined my body for any clues on my identity, which would likely include an x-ray of my body. Why would this be significant? This is where my nerdy autism knowledge comes in. If they did an x-ray of my body, they would have known that I was an adolescent due to the development of my skeleton at the time. Even though I was 19 years old and considered an adult, they wouldn't know that because human males actually do not fully mature and develop completely until age 21. I read about this stuff a lot online, but typically when an unidentified person is found dead and they do an x-ray of the body, they're able to tell if the person is a teenager or an adult, since adult skeletons that are fully developed actually have less bones in them than an adolescent skeleton, due to how bones in the human skeleton naturally fuse together over time as a person matures into an adult. The skeletons of adolescent males between the ages of 13 to 21 actually have certain characteristics to them. Therefore, if my body would have been found in Arkansas and they thought I was a teenager, I would imagine it would have attracted more attention than people think. Missing adults and unidentified deceased adults usually do not attract much attention, especially if they weren't murdered. But if they would have thought that I was a teenager, they would have tried getting the case noticed more because they would likely be assuming that I had parents who were looking for me and wondering where I was, as technically I would actually have, even though it was all their fault this was happening. But as I said, Everyone from Arkansas who I tried discussing this with never even gets to that point of what I'm asking them. They're usually too freaked out by the gloomy things I imagine. Which is weird because the only person who would have died in this scenario would have been myself. So I don't know why it freaks them out so much. Is anyone watching this video actually from Arkansas? What do you imagine would actually happen if I was found dead in your town in Arkansas and no one knew who I was at all, but people saw me walking the streets sick prior to my death, and the only thing I was wearing was my red pointy bandana and my red shorts? What exactly do you imagine would happen? How do you think people would react to that? No one from Arkansas has ever answered those questions for me because they're all too scared to for some reason. But as I said, the comments of this video are open, so yeah. One thing that a lot of people have also told me, not anyone from the state of Arkansas, but a couple people have told me that if I was left for dead in the state of Arkansas, and the only thing that was going to kill me was not having any insulin because I purposely left it all behind, they said that there was a chance I would have not died at all, and that I could have been rescued and taken to the hospital. But in all honesty, I seriously doubt this, and let me show you why. So as I said earlier, I actually have been to Arkansas many times, and I have seen a lot of Arkansas. This is a map of everywhere I've been in Arkansas. First, there was the road trip that the stranger I met on Craigslist took me on way back in 2017, shown here in red. Then there was another stranger who drove me around this one town in Arkansas, Helena, West Helena, back in 2021. We barely were even in Arkansas, but still counts as Arkansas. Then the same stranger who brought me to Arkansas back in 2017 brought me back to Arkansas in 2022. Here's the map of where we went that time, here in blue. And then fast forward to summer of 2023, and another stranger I met online drove me all over Arkansas back in 2023. The line in orange is the map of where we went. And last and most recent, my adoptive dad actually took me on a road trip to Arkansas back in summer of 2024 and drove me all over Arkansas. I didn't exactly tell him why I wanted to be in Arkansas or why I wanted to go to Arkansas. He knew that I wanted to go there to film a video, but he doesn't really know the story of what almost happened to me there. I figured I shouldn't tell him because I was worried I might freak him out too much and he wouldn't want to take me there, but yeah. So that's everywhere I've been in Arkansas, those lines all over the Arkansas map. Therefore, I've seen a lot of Arkansas. But from what I've seen of Arkansas, Arkansas is mainly barren wilderness and rural farmlands, with the Ozark Mountains up north, which are the most wilderness areas of Arkansas. If I was actually left for dead out in Arkansas in a rural area, which most of Arkansas actually is, and didn't even want to be rescued, I'm virtually 100% certain that I actually would not get rescued, and I would have absolutely ended up dying of diabetic ketoacidosis exactly as I intended. I figured I should probably talk about this also. I personally didn't want my adoptive parents to ever find out what happened to me, honestly. But I didn't really care so much whether they did or not, but I preferred for them not to, and I preferred for the mystery to haunt them for the rest of their lives because I was really angry at them for making me keep the job, and this was my way of getting back at them. But the whole reason why I was running away is because I just wanted to die and be free from the retail job for eternity. So the main reason why I was doing this wasn't just to upset my adoptive parents, but I considered that a bonus to all of this, and lack of better ways of describing that. However, there technically are ways I could have been identified, but I imagined it still would have took a very long time. There obviously would have been a missing persons report. She definitely would have reported this to the police. But I can tell you this right now. Cops in my hometown of Wisconsin would not give a shit about this case. If a 19-year-old autistic guy went missing in my hometown in Wisconsin, the cops would not give a toss about it. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that when a person goes missing, or if a person is found dead and is unidentified, what they usually will do is they'll take DNA samples from that person and process them and enter them into the missing persons database to see if there's a match to any DNA from missing people. That's actually how quite a few unidentified people who were found dead somewhere have been identified from their DNA matching the DNA of missing persons. My adoptive mother obviously doesn't have the same DNA as me, so she would need DNA from a biological relative, or she would need a sample of my DNA. This is a fake newspaper article that I typed up a few years ago, which explains that I have been identified after being found dead in Arkansas. It also explains exactly how I would have been identified. At first, I was imagining that one way I would be identified is if my adoptive mother located the remains of my biological father, who was killed in prison back in 1998, and had his body exhumed so they can collect DNA samples from him and submit that into the missing persons database. But the more I think about it, the more I think that would be extremely unlikely, since my adoptive mother had no connection to my biological father at all. Therefore, I don't know how she would be able to have them exhume his body or anything like that. There actually is a much more simpler way that my adoptive mother would have me identified, but I don't even think that she would think of this, really. Getting back to the whole missing persons database and DNA and everything, my adoptive mother would either need a sample of a biological relative's DNA of mine, or a sample of my DNA. As you guys all know by now, I am a type 1 diabetic. Therefore, I'm always giving myself insulin shots and insulin injections to stay alive. Usually, when I give myself an insulin shot, I dispose of the needle in a sharps container. Yeah, we always had those laying around the house, 'cause that's where I would put all my used insulin needles in. I'm not sure if she would even think of this, because my adoptive mother didn't really know much about Jane Doe and John Doe cases, but I did tell her that I was going to run away and die somewhere and be a John Doe. I would bring that up a lot during our arguments. And if she really thought that's what actually happened, I'm pretty sure eventually she would be smart enough to try to get a sample of my DNA and submit it into the missing persons database, but I don't think she would think of that right away. I think it would take her a long time to come to that conclusion or make that decision or to think of that, really. My adoptive mother does watch a lot of crime investigation shows, but she never really seemed to watch anything about an unidentified person being found dead or about Jane Doe or John Doe cases at all. And even if she did think of that right away, DNA would take weeks to process. At least back in 2015 it did. And even on top of that, that would depend on whether the people who found me dead in Arkansas, who were in charge of that, would be competent enough to actually submit my DNA from my body into the missing persons database, which they likely would, but either way, that would all take a while to go through and everything. And it would also take a while for them to make a match. So I still would have been a John Doe for quite a while. But even if I was identified, I still would have been free from the retail job for all of eternity if I would have died in Arkansas, which was really the main point of all this, but I just felt like throwing that in. The last thing I wanted to say in this video is that this video took me a long time to edit because the topic was very gloomy. I noticed that I seemed really bitchy and really angry in the footage I recorded, but the reason why is because it actually really pissed me off thinking back about all this. Why did things actually have to get that bad in my life for me to come to that point? Yeah, my whole obsession with Jane and John Doe cases and me actually wanting to die and become a John Doe definitely does seem very out there, and I understand why people think that that's batshit crazy, and I wouldn't blame anyone for calling me batshit crazy for that. But looking back on it and thinking about everything I've been through, it honestly makes perfect sense that I ended up going that far off the rail back then. Nothing about that confuses me at all, and it makes perfect sense, really. I would often get into many arguments with my adoptive mother about how much I hated that job, and she even knew that I was suicidal. I want to assume that a good parent would just try to help their kid instead and have their kid quit the job if things were seriously that bad for them, but obviously that's not the kind of adoptive mother I had back then. She definitely has made up for it since, but it still pisses me off that things honestly had to get that bad. There's obviously more that happened after this, but 6 months later, I actually ended up quitting the job. Definitely against my adoptive parents' wishes, obviously, and more stupid stuff happened as a result of that, but it ended up working out, for the most part at least. And another thing to mention is that the retail store I actually worked at back then has since gone out of business in year 2018 and was actually demolished earlier this year. Here's actual footage of the actual store that I actually worked at being torn down. I'm going to blur out the logo of the store here though, but it felt really good seeing this. Better them than me. Overall, this story does seem sad, but it honestly isn't sad at all. I consider this more a story of survival, and with my gloomy autistic imagination being fascinated with gloomy stuff in general, I always find it interesting to talk about. It's just that when I focus on how unfair things were back then is when it gets difficult to talk about. That's why this video took so long to edit. But is anyone from Arkansas actually watching this video? What exactly do you think of all this? From my experience, most people from Arkansas are too freaked out to comment on this story because they can't believe anyone would even be thinking stuff like this, but yeah, crazy people exist. I'm definitely one of them. But I'm still curious to what you imagine would happen if this actually ended up being my fate in real life. Please share your thoughts in the comments.
So that's basically it for this episode of Deaths of Joe Winko. There are more on the way, and there is definitely more that happened after this. But that's basically it for this episode, so please share your thoughts and let me know what you think in the comments of this video. And don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to like my fan page on Facebook and follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. And don't forget to sign up for Rumble and BitChute and Oddsee, because those are sites that I'm going to try to post my videos on from now on, because I'm getting tired of YouTube. So that's basically it. Peace out, people.